huge amount, but there we are. Let's talk to Miriam Cates now. She's Conservative MP and Education Select Committee member, because there's a very concerning new report out from Policy Exchange. Now, Policy Exchange is one of the leading think tanks in Westminster, and Miriam is an MP who has lent her support to this report, which is showing that secondary schools are effectively facilitating medical interventions on site, with over 30% of them failing to inform what's called a designated safeguarding lead. This is about children changing their gender. Very concerning, I think. Without parental consent, parents are just not being told. Miriam, a very good morning to you. Great to have you on. Really appreciate your time here. What is going on here?
I think this is an incredibly widespread problem. We've known for some time that not only is there a significant increase in the number of children presenting with gender distress, but also that schools
What is gender distress? Just for people watching, what exactly is that, Miriam?
So I think gender distress is the idea that a child decides that they're uncomfortable with their biological sex. So most frequently this is girls going through puberty deciding that actually they might be a boy, or they might be non-binary, which means they kind of don't identify with either sex. Now, just to step back from this for a minute, this idea that you can be a different gender from your biological sex is made up. There is no scientific evidence for it. Obviously, it's an ideology that has very much captured a lot of our public debate, but it is just a theory. There is no fact behind it. There are two biological sexes, male or female. Obviously, there's an infinite number of different ways to express your biological sex and who you are, but there are just two biological sexes. But over the past 10 years particularly, there's been this extraordinary rise in children, particularly girls, who are expressing distress with their sex body. And of course, puberty is a very difficult time for many children, and it's not unusual at all to be uncomfortable with your body. But what is unusual is to have this idea and to have this idea reinforced by schools that you could actually be a different sex, a different gender because of your feelings. And what seems to be happening in schools, and not just a few schools, but an extraordinary number of schools, according to this report, is that those children who are expressing distress, mental distress, instead of being safeguarded, so instead of going through processes of telling parents, involving other agencies, making sure that this is a safeguarding issue, of properly supporting the child, they are being accepted from safeguarding process. Their feelings are being taken as fact, and their parents are not being kept informed in an awful lot of places. And those are safeguarding fails. And if you think of any other issue, let's say a child said, I've got an eating disorder, I think I'm fat, I'm trying to lose weight.
Or if they're at risk of being radicalised in some way, or if they are being brought into gangs, or even if they're just acting out in school. That is a safeguarding issue. Certain people have to be informed, but what's happening here is that parents are not being informed if they want to change gender. So is this, I mean, this is really as much, I've read bits of the report, and it appears to be that if children in school say that they want to be known by a different name, or they want to be a different, identified by a different gender, their parents are not being told necessarily.
Exactly, and I personally know many families where this has happened and they haven't known that in school time their child has been treated as a different sex, as a girl, let's say, has been called he and him and a different name, and then in communications with parents, the birth name and birth sex have been used. And again, that's an incredibly worrying, safeguarding red flag, to be keeping secrets from parents.
Why aren't schools keeping secrets from parents on this absolutely fundamental issue? I mean, this is how children are described, how they're referred to. This is sometimes the changing rooms that they're using in schools. I mean, why are they not being informed here?
Well, that is, of course, the primary question that we need to answer. And I think further on in the report, there are clues to that. And it explains how certain organisations, like, for example, Stonewall, have made their way into schools. Because originally, you know, their initial campaigns were very well respected, very effective civil rights campaigns around gay rights and preventing gay people from being discriminated against. But that has been used as a Trojan horse, really, for this trans ideology, this gender ideology, to make its way into schools. And because of the kind of atmosphere around political correctness and equality, diversity and inclusion, I think very few people have dared to challenge this very new idea that you can change sex or change gender and present as a different gender to your biological sex. And I think obviously many parents do not want their child to be absorbed by gender ideology. They don't want their girls to be binding their breasts and allowing boys in their changing rooms. And so, of course, if the parents did know, they would probably complain and also express severe dissatisfaction with their, what their child, the feelings that were being affirmed in their child at school. So I think, some schools have chosen, rather than to have that battle with parents, to just keep them in the dark. Of course, this isn't every school, and we should be very clear that there are schools who are doing a good job of this and navigating what is an extremely difficult issue.
I wonder, Miriam, from the teacher's perspective, there are some teachers who, of course, do the right thing. There are some who will go along with this woke ideology and hoodwink parents in this regard. As this survey has found, lots of schools have been given freedom of information requests and so on. In terms of what the parents know and what they find out at various points, what is your advice to them? You're a member of the Education Select Committee. What is your advice to parents in regard to trying to reconnect with a school here, especially if their child is in what's called gender distress?
I think there are all sorts of options, and of course for most parents the number one priority is to keep the lines of communication open with the school. And of course lots of parents do have to resort to formal complaints in this issue, but that's difficult in itself because it creates barriers with the school and difficulties and things like that. And at the moment there is no answer to that question, and that is the problem, because schools are not following any accepted safeguarding procedures on this issue. Because
sorry to interrupt you, Miriam, but are they getting the right guidance from the Department for Education here? Do you think? I mean, the ideas around this aren't settled necessarily. They're settled in my mind. They're settled in your mind. But it just seems that a lot of teachers, I'm sure, perhaps who are listening or watching this, and parents as well, they're sort of casting around in the dark, really, aren't they?
Yes, and that is a very good point. And you had the Secretary of State on earlier, I think, talking about this guidance that is going to be produced. But it's been promised for over a year. And I think this report shows just how urgent it is. And the report flags up certain practices that some schools are employing that are probably unlawful. For example, not keeping single-sex toilets and changing rooms. That's probably unlawful. And it's certainly completely unfair and dangerous, particularly to girls. So we desperately need this guidance. And I do very much feel for schools and head teachers trying to navigate this issue with an awful lot of competing voices. But fundamentally, safeguarding has to be at the heart of that guidance. We must have single-sex spaces and single-sex sports for boys and girls. There are obvious reasons for that. And it cannot be the case that schools are allowed to enforce medical interventions with no knowledge of parents and no input from medical professionals. That seems to be fairly straightforward safeguarding rules. So we desperately need those guidance from the DFE in order for schools to be able to follow them. But it is going to be controversial, there's no doubt about it, because many schools and certainly many children have sadly swallowed this idea that you can choose your gender identity and that other people ought to affirm that.
Okay, Miriam Cates, thank you very, very much indeed. Miriam Cates is a Conservative MP and member of the Education Select Committee in Parliament. James Heal, just a quick word from you on this. What do you make of what Miriam Cates was saying there?
I think the key thing is that there has been this vacuum between about 2014 and 2023. That was been waiting 4 years now for the promised sex education review, what the schools should be teaching. There isn't sufficient guidance from DFE. That's partly because I think we've had about 6 education secretaries in the last couple of years. But in that gap, I think also the wider debate has really changed on trans rights. You can see what's happening in Scotland, stepping back from the Gender Recognition Reform Act. You can see the World Athletics Council changing its rules on elite transport. You can see Labour moving away from its previous positions, and the Conservatives as well, on gender self-ID. So much broader, the bigger debate has changed on that. And I think some schools are sort of teaching what was considered the direction of travel a few years ago. Others just don't know what they're doing, and other groups obviously are looking to the DFE for guidance. So I think this is an issue which Gillian Keegan really needs to step up on.
And I think there are teachers who have an agenda, absolutely, on this as well. And it's very difficult, but I mean, I think Gillian Keegan, that advice needs to come to schools as quickly as possible. What do you think about this? 0344 499 91000 is the number to call. If your child changed gender, if they said, right, I'm a girl, but I want to be called a boy now, I want to change my name, I want to act as a boy, I want to exist as a boy despite being a girl, yeah, the school didn't tell you. They would be referred to perhaps by a different name. There might be medical interventions. What should you be told? When should you be told it? I mean, this just seems a pretty straightforward issue to me. I don't want to be add to anybody's distress if children, especially going through puberty, are having thoughts about their gender and so on. I mean, this is a tough time. I remember it from many years ago myself. It's a tough time when people have all sorts of thoughts and feelings. But as a parent, surely you want to be there from your child, and you should not be isolated from them by schools following woke ideology. Let us know your thoughts about this. 0344 49